Parenting's hard, you don't know what to do. You're blaming your kids, but it's probably you. You love your kids and that you can trust. Just remember your kids don't suck.
Welcome to Your Kids Don't Suck, cultivating closeness with your children through non-coercive conscious parenting. We're your hosts, Cara Tedstone and Rythea Lee. Let's dive in and grow together. Okay, so we are back, Rythea and I, with another episode of Your Kids Don't Suck. And it's January. It's gonna probably be our first episode of the year, we think, as we figure out the schedule. And we are here with a very special episode with our partners, with my husband Sanjay and Rythea's partner Will. We're really excited because we're gonna hopefully have pretty meaningful conversation about what it's like to parent with our partners in this radical way that is very different. I think as we get into this conversation, it becomes so clear how different it is than mainstream parenting practices. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you, Sanjay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership. Well, we met a very long time ago.
Very long, yeah.
A very long time ago. And it was when we were like teenagers, really. And we met through a friend of a friend, and long story short, we were friends for a long time, dated, etc. And then we got married. But we had Aaliyah first. So we had a wedding, a big Indian wedding, when Aaliyah was 3 months old.
What's it like for you? What's going anything you want to share about it that comes to mind? And you don't feel like you have to talk a lot, but like we're also not going to interrupt you. You can just take your time.
I think it's really interesting that in the intro, Cara called it radical because, like, embarrassed to say this, but like I haven't researched many parenting techniques. Like I was parented how most people in this community would say traditionally, but when Cara introduced me to like more conscious, collaborative parenting, like radical is probably one of the words that would never come up when I think about this, which is interesting that, she does the podcast and she thinks it's radical and I don't, because it just sounds like the right thing to do when someone explains it to you. So I just thought that was kind of super interesting because we don't really call it radical in our own house, right? But
no, we just call it a fuck ton of work.
Yeah, so it's obviously like very different from the way I was parented, and I guess the way I thought about parenting conceptually. I was raised to like be pretty good in school and, behave if we went out. And if we didn't, there'd be consequences. But I think like a lot of that, I was very happy with the way I was raised. But I think it's like a really interesting approach to parenting that we're taking. And we were talking about this earlier, but like it's still so early. And we see like the relationships that other people in like kind of the non-coercive community have with their children. And that's definitely something we want. But it's like so early, we were just talking about it. Like we're making the investment and we've talked about having this hard day, but it's like there hasn't been the return yet, in my opinion.
I wonder if you could say more about like what we were talking about, which was like the questions, like the wonderings of like, well, we're not doing it a different way. We haven't since she was born. Would she be better behaved? Like, would she act different if we punished her, if we made her not yell or whatever? Like we were talking about this earlier,
Yeah, we were kind of like, there could be like some sort of return in the near term to be more disciplinary. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, you don't know, but like, sometimes you see your friends with like a 2 or 3-year-old or 4-year-old and they're very disciplinary and their child behaves very well from a traditional standpoint. But it's like, who knows what relationship they're going to have with them when they're 7, when they're 11, when they're 17.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many people dread the teenage years. And then I see a lot of people that are practicing kind of non-coercion. They don't have that same experience at all. And that's kind of what it feels like it's all about to me. It's kind of making the investment now for that return when, you aren't in the trenches every day with a toddler. And it's like, I feel like a lot of the, like, what I know about this approach, like, I've learned from Cara and, like, from listening to you, Rythea, and Vivek on the podcast. I know I was just kind of, like, saying there's no return, but, like, sometimes you can kind of see it. And, like, we're obviously, like, very close with her already, but, like, who knows if that's why. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, like giving her the option to like put on her coat outside, and like a lot of the stuff seems to work. And then we have days like today, which are just awful, and you're like, oh damn, like where is the return today? Which I'm sure everybody struggles with.
Well, it's interesting the word work, whether it works, because you're basically saying if she's unhappy, it's not working.
Yeah,
Because you're triggered by her pain and her feelings. So
exactly.
you control a kid, you don't have to deal with your own feelings. You can just make them stop, and then you don't have to feel out of control and helpless. So the working is a kind of obviously a subjective term.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's a poor choice of words upon reflection, but I guess it's just tough to see, what parenting techniques are actually working at this point
Right.
to like produce the relationship you want. And I guess that's why like I used work.
So in this paradigm, working means being close with your child, right? So it sounds like you're both very close with your child. I don't know what closeness means to you, but from everything I've heard.
Yeah, I think we really both get caught up. I mean, I'm doing this like I'll professionally, right? Helping other parents, talking with you, Rythea, every week, like well, every day, and just really involved like mentally in my head about non-coercion. So I understand that like I'm not trying to shape her, but I think both of us get really like down in the dumps. Like we get very like, oh my God, when we just want it to be fun and easy and like enjoy our parenting experience, because like that's all I think we've ever wanted. That's all I'm sure majority of parents really what they want is to enjoy their kid and have more like cooperation, I guess, in their home, just like easiness. And we don't have that a lot of the time. So then I think we get caught up in behavior. The conversation shift to that, like, how can we fix it? How can we fix it? How can we fix it? We want to make it better. We want to make it better. But a lot of it, like I was saying to you tonight, we're just accepting it. Like her feelings, we're just welcoming them. We're working on welcoming them.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying, like not being able to really see the benefit to that right now is like, fuck, it feels exhausting.
Cara, I think you're having a hard day because this is actually not true what you're saying, because you actually see the benefit a lot. I think you're just having a hard day.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, we do see the benefit all the time.
Yeah,
That's
no,
definitely true.
we do. Yeah,
That's true.
yeah. And I've been thinking about it more and like.
But that's a good point though, because when the days are really hard, that's when we go, fuck, we should just be traditional parents. We could just train her out of all this crying. This is ridiculous.
But like I actually think like given her personality and like her sensitivity, just the way she is, like traditional parenting would be like very limiting for her. And it would be like I think it would produce like a dreadful response.
It would
like,
be traumatic for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would absolutely be, it would traumatize her. There's no two ways about it. I mean, that's why I say like in my head, I think I'm gonna put you in a room. That would be traumatizing for her.
Yes.
Other children may shut down or they may respond in a different way. They may play. Who knows? I really like it. Wouldn't surprise me. But Aaliyah, you would not be able to do that to her. That she would receive that as an absolute withdrawal of love. She would feel that immediately.
Most children would. They're shut down to it doesn't mean they're not experiencing it that way. They're just used to some level of it.
And that's why parents who do that regularly, they say my kid like never had a problem with that. Well, we would argue that, how do you know? Right?
Yeah.
And I guess like you have to like work hard as a parent not to react the way you don't want to. And like then when you still have days like this, like it goes back to like, oh, like is what we're doing the right thing? But then I obviously always come back to yes. But like it does kind of make me question kind of like everything, even these one-off days, which like I know I shouldn't, but like yeah.
So I think one of the main reasons that you two go into so much doubt, besides whatever your upbringings were, is that you are isolated in this philosophy. You're isolated in this way of treating your child. It's so hard to do in isolation. It feels almost impossible because most people would judge you and think what you're doing is nuts. And then you're supposed to believe in it. Really, I mean, I'm so touched that you two are on the same page. You're so lucky because in my support groups, almost every single person in my support group is the one parent, and the other parent is actually authoritarian and totally against what the other parent is doing. I don't know how they do that. Oh my God, it sounds like a hell realm. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a good segue. Because like for me to trust myself, it just was so hard. Oh my God, it's so hard. I didn't have you, Karen. I had my one friend, Naomi, and that was good. And then I found Vivek and whatever. But even having Vivek and even having a little bit of support was never enough. I want to live in a community where people treat their children this way. And then I wouldn't have to doubt myself all the time. I just want to validate that. I think that's probably why it's so hard for you to trust it every day.
Hmm. I think that's a huge part of it, because it really is in those micro moments that you see other parents interacting with their kids. Then you kind of internalize that as like, oh, well, maybe Leah would behave better if we did that. And that's, I think, very toxic for me personally.
Mm. I'm introducing Will, my partner, Will. And I wanted to get the chance to say that, like, this is my best friend in the whole wide world, who is really my co-parent. I mean, my daughter has her dad also, but like in the way that we're parenting, Will and I are really on the same page, and it's just the sweetest thing. And when I forget, he reminds me what we're doing, and vice versa. And I just couldn't do it alone. And I know some people are trying to, but I couldn't. And yeah, it's so amazing we just talk about Tori all the time, and we're just so into her well-being and her growth, and now she's homeschooling a bit, so we're into that, and she's blossoming, and it's so incredible to share that with you, Will. So I'm really excited to hear Will just talk about a little bit about this journey, and I'm open to whatever you want to share about it.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm kind of a private person. So even though I'm a writer and I write about myself in a metaphorical way, I'm really nervous to talk in this way. So if I seem hesitant or withdrawn, it's just because it's not necessarily my comfort zone, but I really want to share. And it was really, Sanjay, wonderful to hear you talk, just because of how humble you are in describing it, your relationship to it. And I really wasn't that way for a really long time. I felt like I didn't sort of actively disagree, but I sort of passive aggressively disagreed for a long time. And so it took me a long time to really believe in our approach. So I was doing it, but I wasn't necessarily, I was doing it more because I wasn't going to not do it, but I didn't necessarily believe in it fully for years.
You kind of had to do it because I was like, this is what we're doing.
Right. No, and I wasn't going to not do it, but
right.
I definitely took me a lot of years to sort of believe in it and understand it. And now we're in a very different place because, we're sort of at a place where Tori's really blossoming. So it's self-evident, but it definitely wasn't self-evident for 7 years or more, around that much. And so it just felt to me like the biggest risk in the world to go into an uncharted way of parenting with the belief that it would work, when work meaning create a person who has an identity of themselves and build a relationship with the world that is one based on who she is and not who she's told to be. It just felt like what a huge risk. Because if this is not actually working in that way, or if this is sort of kind of an ideal but not a practical thing, it just felt like it's like, what bigger risk could we make in our lives than try something with our child that, what if we're wrong? Or really, I felt like, what if Rythea is wrong? So, and then there was a lot of sexism in there, presuming to know better than her mother, and I think there's something about non-coercion, which is particularly challenging to patriarchy, in the sense of patriarchy's control over people, and that I think felt like on some unconscious way really threatening, and I think that made it harder to embrace. So it's been really hard. At the same time, like I really see how close Rythea and Tori are, and how close now I am to Tori, and more than that, just I see who she is, and I see that she's herself, and that she's finding her way in the world according to who she is, as opposed to some imposed version of herself in most ways. And so I feel really, really proud, but it's been like the hardest thing I've ever done.
What can you say? What's been hard about it?
Well, I think it just comes down to, I guess, I mean, some of it was more about unschooling than it is about non-coercive parenting, but they're really wedded together.
Mm,
Um, so I think it just felt like trusting a child to find who they are, to know internally who they are, as opposed to their parents telling them who they are, or sort of setting up opportunities, or creating options that the parent defines, and the child can choose between those options, as opposed to the whole world of options. Like it felt like, what if she doesn't make her way out of, what if she can't function on her own? Like I mean, I think the idea is to support their autonomy, but in practice it feels like, in some way, for a long period of time, actually sabotaging her autonomy, because like when the whole world is available to you, like it's kind of terrifying, and you kind of go inward. And we've seen a lot of that with her, not now, but for years. And that felt like really scary, that there's this being who came into the world, and we're responsible for supporting her to become
functional.
or just like in this world that's so complex. And what if this approach doesn't do that?
Yeah, like what if we're stunting her somehow?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a huge fear. If you don't control children and push them and coerce them into things, maybe they won't develop. I think that, and then maybe they won't be functional, and then maybe they won't get out of your house.
Well,
That's really interesting
big question
to think about, because like if you think like 90 or 95% of the people parented that are our age were controlled a little bit by our parents, and like think about all the negative outcomes. And it's just like really interesting to hear Will talk about, the risk of doing it non-coercively, but it's like there's already a risk out there proven. A bunch of people that we know from traditional parenting. So I just thought that was really interesting to hear.
Right.
And a lot of like being able for me to kind of jump into this right away. Like I think like in my head, I'm like, oh, Kara's an expert on this. Like, I'm just gonna follow her lead a little bit. But two, it's like because we have like access to people who have already done it, and it's like a lot easier to see the reward. And maybe you didn't have that opportunity right at the start, because I feel like this community like feels like it's kind of new and just building.
Are you saying you know families who've raised their kids non-coercively and it came out really good? Like who?
I'm just referring to listening to this podcast.
And like you.
Yeah, like you.
Our podcast.
Yeah, you. Yeah.
Oh, so you have the help of that. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I feel like maybe if Will had this back then, it would be easier because
I think that I was pretty resistant, and even if I had this model or others, I think it just would have still taken me a long time. Like I like to think that that's true what you just said, but I don't think that's true. Like yeah.
There is something about my intuition. I was following my intuition.
Right.
Mother's intuition. I knew, and I also heard like children give you feedback right away. Like you get the feedback immediately when you're being hurtful. I'm not saying everyone's listening to that, but it was very clear with my kid when I was starting to hurt her.
Yeah, and I guess part of it for me was like, Cara has worked with kids her whole life, I have not. And like Kara has also does this for a living now, and I do not. So it's like, why wouldn't I trust her?
Right.
You know? So
But one
it's
of our
gonna be
questions is how we wanted to ask both of you is how do you know what are the markers to know that this is good? This is right for you. Not just because you know and you trust Caroline, but like what are the moments with your child where you're like, oh, this is absolutely right? How do you know that?
even like thinking about it today and like not snapping and saying what was actually in my head and responding the way that she probably needed in that moment. Like, even though we had a tough day, like looking back on it, like that's how I know it's like for me. Like, I feel like I'm pretty gentle anyways. And like, I feel like without this, like I might be pretty authoritative and
Mm.
like be like, oh, Lee, if you like don't put your coat on, we're not going to get a treat. Like I feel like I would be like that. And like learning that you can be a different way and it still works. It works, I'm using that word again, but to get her out of the house and like go do
Right.
X, Y, and Z, like go do our day without being authoritative. Like I'm just like that's kind of what it's all about to me at this point.
But still, how do you know, like, what are some of the like markers internally? Like, what do you feel, and what about like how do you feel inside your heart like that is
I
working?
feel like when I respond the way I want to, we often like share a moment of like affection shortly after. Whereas if I was harsh, I would think that would not happen.
Mm.
Especially as she gets older.
Mm.
Yeah,
At least that's kind of like my hypothesis of what's going on.
no, I
Mm.
think it's true.
That's so sweet, Sanjay.
Really is.
Yeah, I've been telling people to write those things down so that when you're really triggered and you think this is crap, you can go read all the reasons why it's working.
Mm.
So we don't have a world that will reflect that for us. What about you?
Well, I think the way in for me was kind of more like from like a political point of view. Like that's when I feel like okay. I mean, and now we feel like we're really close, and so but this is like, you know, he and I have been together, and I've been in Tori's life for 9 years. But like if I can like go back like 5 years from now, when I feel like the way that I understood it's working is like from a political place, meaning it's similar to what you just said, Sanjay. Like most of the world is created through control, and it's not really going that well. And so I come from a background of like organizing and theater, like theater based organizing, mostly for racial justice. And so I know that the whole system we have is really fucked. And so when I start to see that like me controlling my child is an extension of this whole system, and I know how destructive it is, then I started like, well, how can I talk about sort of these big systems and changing them if I'm in my very own little house with the person who's closest to me replicating them? Like that doesn't make any sense. So I think that when I started to sort of understand on that level, then I think I really started like, okay, okay, this makes sense to me.
That is so cool. I'm so glad you said that.
Mm.
Now I sometimes like feel like in my head, I'm like, I'd be such a loser right now if I was yelling at my baby for being a baby. Like she's not even two.
Mm.
She can't talk, and I'm getting like frustrated that she's not like communicating 100% with me,
Right.
and I can't solve what's going on. And I like in my head, I want to yell at her for being a baby, and I'm like, what? I saw it today actually, which is funny because going back to like Will's comment of like, he was a bit harsh last night. Like I think in my head, like I saw like 30 things more harsh today at the park for 30 minutes. Like one per minute more harsh than
Definitely, yeah.
what Will made last night sound like.
No, I appreciate that reflection, but and it's good. It's good because it is true. It's like the standard. It's like what you said, Kara. Like standard you hold yourself to is so high. It's like impossible, essentially impossible to meet. And so you just like, well, so then I'm failing all the time if that's my standard. But it is still high. And but Sanjay, something you said earlier, it's just like I feel like I really struggle with sexism in the like getting over to with the internet. I mean, I do have I'm a teacher and I've been a lifetime working with young people. So I guess in some level I've had experience, but I haven't had experience as a parent at all. So I don't know how I thought that somehow coming into a family I knew better than the mother of the child, but I did. And it doesn't seem, I don't know, I'm kind of like, I really appreciate you just being like, yeah, of course I'm going to follow Sarah. Like, I didn't have that feeling.
Yeah, I can understand that because like I have thoughts in my head, but then I also like think I'm like, what the hell do I know about this? Like,
But what you just said, you thought like, oh, I know, and then the second thought was, what the hell do I know about this?
yeah,
And that second thought, it took me a long time to get that second.
yeah,
We had this terrible argument that used to happen over and over again, which was I would be like, he'd be like, just tell me, why are you doing da 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 da? And I'd be like, I can't explain it. I don't know. I don't have the language for it. I just know it's right. I'd be like, you need to go get educated yourself.
Mm.
And we would like go, we'd like hit this place. We'd be like, I just want you to explain it to me. And I'm like, I just want you to do the research.
But then I would do the research, meaning like read or like listen to podcasts, and then it would never be enough because basically what Rythea was saying was not go listen to the podcast or do the reading, but trust me.
Mm.
Oh, this is nice to hear you say all this.
Mm.
It's really like being a rock and a rock spinner. I mean, like Will made his way through this.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, just to say that you and Tori are so close, and I think you know about love.
I do, and I think that's I don't even know how to take that in because it's like I can't even take it in anyway. Yeah, I'll come back to that. I'm just gonna take that in.
Yeah, I think the love between Will and Tori is really, and the joy, and they laugh together, and they just, oh my God, and when they get in a groove, and I think that's what has led you.
Right, that's true.
Those loving places.
And I think one thing that I feel really proud about is I've really taught Tori a lot about repair, meaning like when I've done something kind of judgmental or harsh or pushy or and then I apologize and we kind of have a whole process together with repair both ways. Like she also we have just years of practice of like she'll be like I feel disconnected and then we'll be like what happened and then we'll talk through it. And we've been doing that for years. And I think it's been really powerful because like I'm gender fluid, but I'm socialized as a man and I'm like by most people's idea, like a man. And I just know like how few men there are in the world that do that with women and with girls. And so like for her to feel like she can stand up for herself and a man can apologize and repair and take responsibility, I feel like it's like part of setting herself up for a different kind of relationship with men in her life.
Mm.
Oh, that's so true. It's like it brings me such joy. It's so true.
That's super interesting. Like I feel like I'm gonna have to like re-listen to this and like take notes of what Will is saying because it's such good advice for like the way I want to parent. So which one's like it goes back to again like why it's easy for me to like trust this pathway. And like people like you it helps a lot.
Thea, like I know that you had Vivek and like his podcast and that the ideas, but still like you had yourself ultimately and your intuition. So I'm just wondering like what and I know your history of course, but like still even deeper than that, like how did you have such a clear knowing inside yourself that could lead you to like do something which nobody else was doing, which most of the world thinks is actually really damaging, which is like more work than any other kind of parenting. And like how did you just hold on to that one without any reinforcement externally?
I mean, I did have a best friend who did that, raised her daughter. She didn't call it non-coercion. She just said, I'm not going to interrupt my kid's flow. And that just, I don't know, she understood harm just intuitively. So I had an example of that, my friend of like 30 years, you know. And then I think when I found Vivek's work, it's like he was giving words to something that I knew, but I didn't have any language for. And it just clicked. Something clicked.
So can you just talk about what that was? That
Click?
because now you do have language for it, but can you look back at yourself and see what it was that you were feeling then?
Yeah, it was about force. It was about using force on my child to get her to do what I wanted or to stop doing what I didn't want her to do. It was about using force on her being.
Mm.
And already starting to see problems with her, like big problems with the force I was using, even though I was such a loving, emotionally based, playful parent, but I still believed I had the entitlement to force her to do all kinds of things. And I was starting to see problems in her behavior and in our relationship already by the time I discovered it. And then when I started to see she was hiding things from me, that was it. I was like, oh wait, she's already starting to create a separate world from me. This is so bad. Like all the alarms went off. Like this is just going to get worse and worse. She's going to have to start holding more and more away from me. And thank goodness I found something that named that, like what the opposite of that was.
Mm.
It's amazing you recognize that, because like what you just described in your early parenting is how I guess think about how I would have definitely parented. But if I like just thinking about that scenario, I'd just be like, oh, all kids hide stuff. Like I'm doing a great job. Like that's probably what I would tell myself. So like it's really great that, you know, you made that adjustment after, like you were able to see, you know, those two worlds, because like that to me would just be like, oh, like that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm still doing a great job.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
that's really well. That's really clear what you just said.
I mean, I grew up in a household where I just created a completely separate reality from my parents. And it was terrible because it meant I had to raise myself and keep everything secret and figure it all out alone. And I started to see the tiny, teeny signs of that. I'm like, uh-oh, she's trying to create a separate world. This is so bad. And it's true. We're it's not like that. Like because of this path that I chose and that we're doing, like we're in the same world together. She always wants to tell me everything. Like we went out to dinner with some friends and she's like, Mom, come here. Did you notice blah, 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 blah during the dinner? And I'm just like, oh, this is the best. Like she wants to tell me like right after what she thought. I mean, oh, that's like my dream. That's like dreamy.
Mm.
And it may not always be that way. Like I don't think that like she's going to grow and she's going to need to keep things to herself, and there's
Right.
going to be things even now that she's, you know, has to work out and doesn't want to share. So I don't think that it's that she's fully transparent as a being. That like I don't. It's just more that there's a foundation of that she I think does know, that she can always go back to.
Mm-hmm.
That
Well,
is a really good point because yeah,
Yeah.
she does have things. She doesn't want me to read her journal.
mm-hmm.
I want to read her journal.
Yeah. Right.
She doesn't want me to because she is developing her sense of self. It is separate from me.
Right,
I just want to
right.
say that I'm not trying to like, you know,
Mm.
beat her. But yes, that we are a safe place to like really process things. I hope that always happens.
Hmm. Well, you know what's really challenging is for when parents who, because I work with teen clients who the parents often come to me and ask me how I can help them support the teen at home. They'll ask me, they'll explain that what their parenting has looked like has been traditional. They don't necessarily have the language to call it that, but they explain that they've used consequences and you know, explicit teaching and things like that are not in alignment with non-coercion. And they'll ask me like, what do you suggest I do? Because I really want, now that they're going to university or they're going to high school, like I want them to come and tell me what, you know, what they're doing in terms of relationships, in terms of when they have sex for the first time. Like these are things they want to be able to help with. It's very difficult to go from a traditional controlling relationship to an open, safe and all trusting one, right? So it's not about having your child actually tell you everything. That's not what we are necessarily trying to go for in non-coercion. It's just that if the option's there, they know that you're going to be reciprocative towards it, and there's not going to be shame or judgment there. And that's really difficult to establish really later in life. So that's been really my ultimate reason for doing this path, is that I want Aaliyah to be raised with that.
That's really clear.
Sanjay, I kind of want to hear a little bit about like how what you're doing is so different from your upbringing. Because it was interesting, you said you kind of like how you were raised.
I feel like I don't have like any issues with the way I was raised. Like I'm pretty close to my parents. I love them like very deeply. I think the way they parented me worked out really well for me. I was also the youngest of three, and quite a bit after the other two. Like I'm 8 and 6 years younger than my brother and sister. So I feel like they had like more time with me. They were less stressed at work. I think this was kind of mentioned earlier, but I come from an Indian background, and like my parents are like traditional parents, but I wouldn't say they're like stereotypical strict parents that you would see in like a cartoon about like Indian people in America or something. But like
Right.
yeah, there was stuff like, oh, you like you should be a doctor and you got to study hard, and you like, especially for my sister, it was like dating was obviously a big issue in like our household. But all of that I thought was like very normal, and I guess for like from my standards of parenting like throughout the Indian community, I would not call my parents strict compared to like what I saw going on, and kind of like what to be more stereotypical in India. But I would say like I guess this approach to parenting is obviously like very different than that. But like my parents are like always talking about like Kara's like posted this on Instagram about parenting, and like, oh, she sounds like she know, like they're always like very supportive of that, and like they're very supportive, I think, of the way we parent now.
Yeah.
I just like a bunch of like parenting that I was exposed to is like, an immigrant household. It has to be like structured in a way that you have to succeed. You have to succeed financially, like you have to have a family because that's very important. You have to get married, you have to have kids. Like I feel like a lot of that comes from not only like my parents' upbringing or a lot of people there, but like in India, like there's no safety net, right? If you like quote unquote like lose, like you're out on the street. And you're out on the street in India. Like it's not North America.
Well, Sanj, sorry to interrupt, but one thing you said recently about traditional parenting in India in the context of this conversation, obviously we can't speak to the whole population, but Sanjay was saying it's about survival, right?
Yeah. I would think that like you have to make enough money to like do well for yourself, and like to do that you have to study, and like parents want to control that environment as an immigrant, because usually you're immigrating to a country to like build a better life, or like there's more opportunity to basically financially succeed or not be persecuted for some beliefs, right? Which my parents were not, but it was really moving to like build a better life from a financial perspective. So a lot of that controls comes with like, oh, what happens if you don't control it and it goes wrong? Because you don't think about like, oh, I'm going to control it and it's going to go wrong. Because whenever you think you're going to control something, it's going to go perfectly. And maybe that's like some of the pushback to, initial thoughts about trusting non-coercive parenting, because you think if you control it, it's going to turn out exactly the way you want, which couldn't be further from the truth, right?
So true, Sanjay. That's so true. Whether you control them or not, you have no fucking control over what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was born in Canada, so I might be like talking out of my ass here, and like maybe someone would dispute that, and like I'm happy to hear that perspective, but like I just feel like the risk of like not having that control, because parents are like, oh, they need to be successful there. Like there's different outcomes and different consequences to not being like quote unquote traditionally successful in a developing country versus North America.
Right.
And
yeah.
But when Sanjay, when you hear things you want to say in your mind to Aaliyah, like you want to say, okay, just stop crying, enough, or whatever, is that because of your childhood?
I'm not sure. I don't like remember like that young. So like I don't know if that was like the way I was raised, or just like what I've seen, like even from societal perspective, like, you know, a well-behaved kid is one that is quiet. And so
Right.
like, in my mind, I don't know if it's like part of it's like biological. It's like you need to solve this and you can't.
Mm.
And like we're wired to react to like crying and, you know, and we're like, we need to stop this. Like we're the parents, and if you don't do that, you're a bad parent.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what is yelling at your kid makes you a good parent? Like, I don't know.
Right.
But
Right.
I don't know if it was the way I raised. Like, maybe it's like the way all traditional parenting is, but I don't know if I would comment on like my situation specifically, but probably to some degree.
Yeah. So you don't particularly hear your parents' voice in your head.
No, not
Uh-huh.
yet, but I'm sure I will.
You should also probably mention too that you had a special relationship with your parents being the youngest.
Yeah.
And they were doctors and took time. You can tell.
Yeah, I think I alluded to this. Like they were very busy when they raised my brother and sister because they had just moved to Canada. They were like doing residency, like they're both doctors, so there was obviously like, a lot of hours. Like my dad used to bring my older sister to the hospital to get breastfed. Like they used to walk there because my mom would be on call. So I think when I came around, my mom was just like, "Oh, I'm going to like take all this time," and you know, my brother and sister always say my parents love me best, and I think it's because they had more time to spend with me,
Uh-huh.
and you know, were thus probably more conscious about their parenting of me versus, you know, my siblings when everything's in a rush and, you know,
Right. It's so beautiful that they support your parenting. That is also rare. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many rare things about what you two are doing.
I think like a lot of it comes down like my initial like concern with this parenting. I was like, oh, is it just permissive parenting? And I know you guys have talked a lot about this, but like Kara has also, you know, talked to me how it's not permissive. I think you know, from like a cultural standpoint, like that is like a definite like no, right? Like permissive parenting is like, well, I feel like one of the worst things you could do in like in Indian culture, honestly. Like I feel like that would be like really bad, but like I feel
Right.
like this is not permissive at all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think your parents can see too how we work with her
Yeah.
to collaborate.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think they would view it as permissive or
No,
spoiling or
they definitely would.
no.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get at. Like if we were doing that, I think they would probably say something because
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of blunt. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. They think like we're doing really well. And I think they think the world of Kara as a mother, and they see her, you know, not every day, but you know, every time we go home, they, you know, we spend hours and hours and days at their house, and
Mm.
you know, they're always like, "Wow, Kara, like you're an amazing mother." Like I feel like they say that to you a lot.
They do.
Yeah,
They really do.
yeah.
So unusual. You know, that's another thing I hear all the time. People trying to do this differently. They just don't have the extended family support. I hear that every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so glad.
Mm. I want to go back
Yeah.
to something that you were saying, and it's kind of braided through a few different things that you said, Sanjay, but related to time and money and class. And this is something that it's more like a wondering and not like a like opinion, but it feels like non-coercive parenting. It just takes a lot of time, like a time to build a relationship, time to allow room for just like exploration. And I think that some of that, like we have more time because of privilege,
Mm.
um, and like specifically, Rythea is self-employed, and is able to work not as many hours as even many self-employed people do. Um, and then I, I mean, I work as a teacher and work as a theater maker, so I have a little bit more of a lot more of a structured schedule. But we also have her half of the time, you know, because she's with her dad half the time, and sort of all that adds up to just like more space and more time with her, and and some of that's by choice because I mean, Rythea chose that life because of partly this reason. But I guess I get a little nervous around talking about non-coercive parenting, just because, and this is, I know so many parents who are having to work two jobs or who are not making enough money to, like, there's just so much financial pressure on so many families. And then I just don't, and I don't want to give parents who just don't have enough time the impression that they can't do it, that this do this well requires you to be in a world that you're not, and therefore just adding to the shame of being poor, especially. So, you know, but I don't know, like, I don't know, I'm just wondering like how that all fits in.
Yeah, I think you make like really good points, and we've talked a lot about that. And it's like, yeah, imagine you had like 2 or 3 jobs and like you need to get out the door. Like you should not be shamed for being coercive. Like I don't think we should shame anyone either. And like, even going back to my prior comments, like I'm joking about using the word like loser or like actually thinking about someone like that. Like that's just a joke. But yeah, no, you make a really good point. Like, and I think if you are struggling with being non-coercive all the time because of a financial situation or because you work multiple jobs or like whatever that is, like, you know, even making like 1 or 2 non-coercive like decisions or, sharing those like, I guess, reactions to whatever's going on could be helpful in your relationship with your kid. Like we're not, it's not all like roses on this side either. And I do think that definitely, so definitely privilege plays into this. Like we're on a podcast like talking about parenting. There's people in the world right now with their kids like hiding from bombs. And like you have to be a controlling parent in that scenario. Like what, like there's a lot of situations where you do have to be a controlling parent or you don't have the flexibility in your own life to do exactly what we're talking about. And I think that's totally okay.
Well, I think of it as like the paradigm of oppression to children that so many people don't ever take that apart. Don't look at the fact that children have no power, they don't have the power in the relationship, and they are oppressed. I mean, people argue with me all the time. My kid is not oppressed. I literally will say, no, my kid, they have a million choices. They live in the United States or they live in my household where I give them a million choices. They're not oppressed. And I have to like really try to like break it down, and it doesn't always work. But like for me, I think of it as no matter what situation you're in, if you can look at your power and how you use your power with your child, no matter what. And if you have to quote unquote force your children to do things all day long, you should at least make that transparent to yourself. Even if you can't make it transparent to your child, you should at least make it transparent to yourself how you're using your power. And it can be in tiny little ways. That's how I sort of handle that
Right.
topic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because people agree across the world that we're allowed to control children's bodies. Like we're just allowed.
Right.
I was in a cafe today, saw a family. One child starts to, and this child is like 2 years old, hitting like a 4-year-old. And the mother comes over and grabs this kid and yanks him off the seat. And totally, the way she was moving his body, I'm like, I am sure she hits him. I could tell by the way she was moving his little body around that she was not going to be treating his body well. It was so painful to watch. And it's like, if you can just start, if any parent can start somewhere, it's just seeing the child as an equal in value. Like just start there. And even if you can't, you still have to make your children do stuff all day long. I think about this shit all the time. It's like I spend all my time thinking about this.
Yeah.
That's why Karen and I are leaving messages all day long. Have you thought about this? What about this? It's like.
Well, it's interesting because you'll pick up on it. He'll go out alone and say, holy shit. And he'll text me, there's a parent screaming at their kid on the subway or whatever, and he'll send me messages. Whereas before, I don't think you would have necessarily even paid attention to that.
No, probably not.
Well, Sanjay, you said something like there's no shame in coercion, but I have like, I actively shame parents I mean, I don't mean to, I'm also a parent advocate, but like, I also just don't think it's okay to just enact without self-reflection. That's not okay. And that's what I'm going after in my work. It's like, you have to self-reflect. That is your job.
I think that's our take, Rythea, right? Is that like, we insist parents look at themselves in the mirror.
Yeah.
Like that's our podcast. Your kids don't suck. It's you that sucks.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think a lot of it, like I just walk by and I'm like, oh, that's like 90% of people. So why why do I care? I guess like I know that sounds kind of shitty, but it's just like, oh, that's just I guess the way it is. And like, if someone told me they like stuff their kid in it, like, we take a lot of time to get Aaliyah like into a car seat.
Oh boy, do
If,
we.
if I'm going to my job and I'm gonna get fired if I don't make it on time, my kid doesn't want to leave, like, yeah, I'm stuffing her in
You're
the car
going.
seat, unfortunately. Like, I'm gonna control you and I'm gonna feel really shitty about it. But at least like afterwards, if you can reflect on it and feel like a little bit shitty about it, and talk to them about why it happened and you feel bad about it, like I think like that's a helpful step that maybe a lot of people don't take.
That's a
Mhm.
great example. I love that. Those little moments where you have to enact your power over your child's body. And you can say, I have a consciousness about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that. Your body, it matters.
Right.
Rythea, I want to check in with you because I have our notes on the side. I'm wondering if there's any questions that are standing up to you as like left unaddressed.
Well, one of our questions is, what is the hardest thing about this?
Yeah.
I think that's a good question to end with. I mean, it's not the happy ending, but it's depth.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
I was like thinking about that, and some of it happened actually today, so it's like a really good question for me today, because it's like really letting her like sometimes just like feel her feelings and feel what she needs to feel, which is often leads to like whining and crying, and you want to solve it or you want to tell her to shut up or like whatever it may be. Like I find that like very challenging because like Cara always says I'm always looking for like a solution, and that's just the way I am, and I want to solve it. And I do find that like very triggering. Just like letting her feel that. I'm like, why are we doing that? But I do understand, but it's just like sometimes very like overwhelming. And then, I would say like some of the stuff that maybe I don't feel is like particularly difficult at this time, but some of the stuff I think is going to be really hard in the future, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. But I guess the three that come to mind would be sleeping. Actually, let's say two that come to mind are sleeping. Like what actually no, okay, we're going back to three. Screen time, sleeping, and eating.
Classic.
Those three, like I like think they're probably pretty difficult with this approach. And I know there's a difference between like being permissive and non-coercive, but like those three, it's like as like a raised in a traditional household, like I had very like strict views on all or just sorry, like very strict views were instilled in me on like those three things. It's just like how is that going to play out over the next 16 years or whatever.
I mean, that is everybody. I just made a video yesterday that said the three main topics where people revert to authoritarian practices are food, screen time, and sleep. That's exactly what I said. Those three things.
That's funny. I didn't see it, but
That's when
yeah.
parents like just lose their shit. It's the places where they go where you think they should not go. It's when your child starts to do something and you're like, that's going to be bad, and then there's all these beliefs about it. And then this is where I've learned in those spots are where you have to really look at your priorities. Is it more important to control X, Y, and Z than to stay in connection and trust your child? And for me, I have to redecide over and over again to trust her process. I just want to tell you this, Cara, because me and Cara just did a podcast on screen time. Tori came home yesterday from her dad, so like 1:00, and she walks in the door. She goes, Mom, take my phone. I don't want to be on it for the rest of the day. Please just go hide it. And she stayed on her phone for like 6 hours after that. At
Can I
least.
just say how you've been updating me about this over the last like 6 months or something? That's huge. And you've done nothing. You literally have just been so hands off. That's amazing.
It was crazy. And then
But that's not, sorry for interrupting, but that's not the goal. Like I remember when you did the podcast about like Toriel cleaned her room, and someone was like, so wait, what you're saying? It's like contradictory because you're saying you're celebrating the fact that she's cleaning her room because that's the societal expectation.
No, but the common belief is if you don't control your child's screen time, they're going to go careening out of control and they'll never be off their phone. That's the common belief. They'll just fry their brain and ruin their brains, and they're just, And so I'm just saying other things are happening besides that.
Yeah, I guess you celebrate it because people that have doubted it would
Mm.
believe it would go the other way.
Mhm.
So you were like celebrating the win over the people that have like doubted your parenting in a way.
Yeah, and also like me, because it's taken how long, I don't know how long she's had a phone, but like I've had to keep saying, trust her, trust her, trust her. And when she makes choices to regulate herself, I'm like, okay, she's learning that she's in relationship to the phone.
Mhm.
She didn't just lost herself to the phone. She came home and just made a choice around it that was empowered.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean.
That's what I always take from what you're saying about the phone thing with Tori, because we've been talking about it so much. It's like it came from her. It was intrinsically her choice. Like she's been motivated to solve this problem for herself. I admire the fact that I know, because of the way that we've talked about it in depth, that you've actually just been letting her have a process.
I've been very, very triggered about it, but yes, I have.
You have, but you've been doing your work to go and talk about all of that.
Right.
And then in conversation with her, when you are triggered, you may repair, or you take all of those extra steps to allow her to continue her process.
Yeah.
To make the decision in the end, which is right now to give you her phone so that she doesn't have access to it, because she's noticing the effects and she doesn't like them. It's not you saying, honey, I'm taking your phone now because I don't like the way it makes you feel.
Right.
Totally different. It's
No,
totally, it's radically different.
it is. And she
And
was making observations about not having the phone. She's
it's
like, I'm going over to my neighbor's house and you have no way to reach me because I'm not taking my phone. And I was like, okay, I'll text the parent. You know, it's like, it was so cool.
See, what I admire about you and always have is that this is what I'm trying to achieve with the parents of my clients, is this type of approach, but it's so difficult because I only work with kids. But I get all their ins and outs of how their parents make them feel. Then I try to explain to the parent, if I can, if I get the opportunity, if they come and book a session with me to seek support, how to do that. So that's why I really, really like hold your comments about Tori. Like I really like, I like keep them, I like save them. I'm like, okay, this is incredible. It really is. Because this is what people's goal should be, is that like if you allow your kid to, as Rythea puts it, have a fucking process, that ultimately they will learn some things about themselves along the way that you wouldn't have been able to teach them with a coercive approach.
My friend who just came to visit, she also works with kids and families, and she read me a text that a parent wrote her about her client who's a teenager, and it was just like, my child is stealing all the time. I don't know what to do, so I took her phone away. Just like,
Yeah,
oh, that
all
was
the
your
time.
conversation? It's like, and you think that's going to make your kid be more honest? Like, well, okay, we don't have to get into that, but anyway, that's just one example.
Before I say what's the hardest for me, just to say one more thing about the phone and the screen time thing, is in addition to like the choice that she made yesterday and whatever choices she'll make in the future, like we, to at least a certain degree, have had conversations with her about what she's watching and why, and what are the race dynamics of those shows and what are the gender dynamics, and then sometimes back away from those conversations because it sounds like we're trying to tell her what to think, and there's just a lot of opening that comes to knowing what she's watching. Whereas if we're trying to control her, it's more likely she's going to hide it, and then we're not going to know like what she's absorbing all day.
Right, then that's dangerous. It becomes dangerous. Control put your kid in more danger.
I agree.
And we talk about this a lot on our other episodes. It's like a big theme. And I just want to say that we're about to publish a screen time episode really soon where the whole thing's on screen time. So we've worked on that. We're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the hardest thing, Will?
School. And this is really about unschooling. And I know that the podcast isn't so much focusing on unschooling, but is it okay to talk about
Should I say what unschooling is before you go into it, or?
Sure.
Unschooling is when your child is homeschooled, but instead of having any curriculum or trying to get your child to learn certain things, you follow them and you support their learning however they want to learn, which can look 100 million different ways.
So I'm a teacher. My mother's a teacher. Her father, or her stepfather, was a teacher and a headmaster of a school. And more than like that lineage, I really believe most of my life has been shaped by teaching. I have had the luck of having a lot of great teachers in my life in various formal and informal ways. So I really believe in teaching. And for most of her life, Tori has not wanted to be taught anything. Like, not anything. Like, not in a small way, or not in a like formal education way, not in a daily interaction way. She has seen teaching as a way to control her, and she has said no. And we've created a structure where that's okay. So it's been incredibly hard for me to feel like really one of my greatest gifts is not one that is like part of the equation. And that's not true. Like, there's lots of ways that I teach her in directly, and modeling and guiding her and not controlling her. And I've learned like it's taken me a really long time, but I've learned ways to like plant a seed in, but not try to control her. And it's like a very, very, very nuanced way to guide, but that has been really hard.
And we're in a really new place with it right now. She is now formally learning from Will.
She's decided she wants to go to school. So she's at least as of now planning on going to school in 7th grade, which is in the fall of 2024. And so we're doing a lot. So she's internally motivated, and there's things that she hasn't learned because of this system. And so I'm doing history with her. Rythea's doing writing, and a babysitter and her dad are doing math with her. And so now I'm kind of like able to do all the things that I've like dreamed of doing. Like, my vision before I entered into Rythea's life was like, I always want to have a child so that I can read to them, or so that I could teach them about writing. And like,
she's just been like, nope, not happening.
No.
But now she's wants to learn,
right?
So, formally.
But
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Fairly. I mean.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that really resonates with me. Not that I'm from a lineage of teachers, but school is obviously always very important. Like, in my household, like growing up in, somewhat of a traditional Indian household, and it's just like, I don't know, I never really liked school, but like so much of my curiosity even today was sparked by like certain teachers that I remember throughout grade school that I think like played very important parts of like my belief system and everything I went on to learn and research. So I feel like a lot of what you said resonates, and like I want to teach like Aaliyah about space-time and stocks one day if she's willing to hear it. But like I've accepted that she may not. But we'll see when the time comes how accepting I really am, and what internal struggles I have, because I imagine it will be very hard.
It is. And when I reached out to there's a online community called
My Reflection Matters.
My Reflection Matters, which is it's a people of color led kind of self-directed learning network. And at a certain point, and the person who's the kind of coordinator named Shimei, at one point I reached out to the whole network about this question, and she responded, other people responded too, but she was like, there's so many things where the idea of what you think is going to be you as a parent doesn't line up with what your child sees themselves. And it's just like, there's just so many letting goes like that. So
you said it one time, Rythea. You said parents will always be able to find ways in which their children disappoint them.
What a great quote.
Such a great quote. But it's like that whole thing reminds me of, I'm a piano player. I play piano. I always have. And it's just such a stupid thing. I mean, it's light. It's not deep. But Aaliyah hates it. She fucking so far. I mean, she might like love it, but she might always fucking hate the piano. And that would be, honestly, it's not as deep as being from like a long lineage. It's not like I'm a pianist from decades of centuries of pianists, but like that's like kind of hurtful in a way. Like, for me to play piano for her, I honestly envisioned like my little toddler sitting there and being like, yay, She hates it. And she might always hate it. And I have to let her know.
Well, Tori is like this really amazing dancer, which I take credit for, and she's an amazing singer.
And her dad's a dancer too.
Yeah, and her dad, right? And she's a natural artist. Well, she's a performer. She's great, but she doesn't want to go to. She's like, I don't want to go to an arts-based school. I'm like, okay, like it's so different than me. But someone said yesterday, well, maybe she gets enough arts at home, and so that's not what she's going after. So that was a cool switch of my perspective. We gotta find those reframes. You know, like maybe she's gonna have to find her way to the piano first before you put it in her ears.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that is true for all of them.
She likes playing it.
Well,
she doesn't like when you
she doesn't
play
like when I play. She's like, get off of this, and forces me away. Yes.
But she will get on there and
and
playing
then
away, and then she'll
look at us and be like,
and she won't stop clapping until we each clap, and then she will start again.
Yeah, she's so cute.
I really want to meet her.
She sounds like a great pianist. What are you talking about?
That's true. Yeah, she doesn't appreciate my piano skills. Well, what does that say about my insecurities, you guys? What do I need my kid to be my little, like, do it again, mommy? Like, okay. Oh, God.
It's been really, really, really great having you two. Maybe we could do it again in 6 months or something. You know what I mean? Just revisit.
I don't think I can do it again in 6 months. I'm so private. Like, this is like
6 months is too soon.
I'm just yes, it's too soon. Sorry.
Right, maybe a year.
I would love you all to come over and us to have a meal together anytime next week.
Yeah, we should definitely.
Yeah, thank you. This is so great.
Yeah,
and I'm also it's really great because I think it's really unusual for two parents in a household to be on board with this, and I think it's going to be really helpful for people. I really do.
This has been Your Kids Don't Suck. You can find me, Cara Tedstone, at www.caratedstoneTherapy.com and on Instagram at Cara Tedstone Therapy. On my website, you'll find links to recommended readings and a link to my Reparenting with Mindfulness workbook, available now on Amazon.
You can find me, Rythea Lee, at www.rythea.com. That's RYTHEA.com. There you'll find published books, articles, and music, and parenting videos. Also, I'm on TikTok at Rythea Lee, on Instagram at Rythea Lee. You can book parent mentoring sessions with me through my website. And also I have an Advice from a Loving Bitch YouTube show that helps people heal self-hatred, and that's rythea.com/advice. It is important and essential to put our voices, Rythea and Cara, in a context. We are two white, cisgendered, straight, middle-class women living with financial and societal privilege. Because of this, our perspectives are limited and do not reflect the realities of all of our listeners. This podcast will feature guests with expertise around conscious parenting who differ in race, class, abilities, sexual orientation, and histories from us, to broaden the conversation and reflect the lives of as many people as possible. 25% of the proceeds of this podcast will go to creators of color who have been mentors and influences on our work and in our growth as parents.
If you like our show, please subscribe and stay tuned for more conscious parenting advice and insights. And check out our link tree at linktr.ee/yourkidsdon'tsuck to donate and connect with us.